Of course, when it got blocked on top of the fell, everything backed up right through the village. And yes, stillness was one of the things you noticed, because you were used to the rumble of wagons, because it was all the heavy transport at night as a rule. And it was always very quiet, and I've seen it right through the village and out the other side. And of course, when I was at secondary school, we couldn't get to school. The buses couldn't get through. It was wonderful. You could have some days off. Shap became notorious for the snow and the blocking of the road. When you think about it, it really only affected a handful of days in the year. And yet that seemed to be the main thing. And I can remember the police used to be going up and down the village, and they used to manage to somehow miraculously get the lady that ran the old Red Wings cafe on the top of the fell, which was at that time 2 old buses back to back, used to manage to get her out of the village in a Land Rover up there, so that she could brew up and supply the needs of those who were stuck up right on the top of the fell. But I have been on the fell in blizzard conditions. It's a terrible experience. The snow will come horizontally, and it's really coming at such force, it's stinging. It's almost like a sandstorm, and very, very cold. You can hardly open your eyes to see what you're doing. So it must have been quite horrific for anyone who was up there. The WVS, which we had a group of ladies in that, and at the time it was quite a good group going, and they used to open up the memorial hall, and there was emergency sleeping facilities in there for the wagon drivers who stranded, and they used to put a soup kitchen on, such like. But anyone who had like a lady passenger versus cars, the police used to go around various houses and say, have you got a spare bed? You know, the ladies got the priority comfortable nights.
From the earliest motoring days onwards, any radio report about snow usually said Shap is blocked, and just about everyone from Land's End to John O'Groats knew exactly what happened, that this pass through the Lake District had been closed.
And that 1962-3 winter was the worst one I can actually remember really well. But during the late 60s, after I left school and I was working in Kendal, they had what they called a night watch scheme running on the fell, whereby the council wagon with the grit used to go and park up on that lay-by on the top. As soon as it started to snow or freeze, they'd start spreading salt. And as a result, quite often they prevented the road being closed, because one of the worst places was the Demings on this side, going between the Shap Pink Quarry and the summit. It's a very slow grind up there. And often it wasn't depth of snow so much as they articulated lorries jackknifing in slippery conditions. And once they got jackknifed across the road, nothing could get past them in either direction. So that was one of the major reasons why it used to get blocked.
When I was a little girl, all the traffic was stopped on Shap, and they used to be stuck for about a week. And the drivers used to walk back down to the Jungle Transport Cafe and seek rest, you know, for the night. And then in the morning they used to wander back up and see if things had altered. But anyway, 3 lads came, well, 3 drivers we thought they were, and they came to our house and said, could we put them up for the night? Well, our house wasn't as big then, and my dad said, well, I can't put you up in the house, but you can sleep on the brackens in the stable. So they thought that was great, and they brought some blankets in. Well, every morning, this was during wartime, they went out up Shap to look at the lorries to see, and anyway, first day they came back with a nice big box of margarine. And my mother thought, and because she was feeding them, she was giving them slap-up breakfast, bacon, egg, and what have you. And she said, oh, where have you brought this from? They said, well, they'd brought it off the lorry. And she said, oh, well, thank you very much, it's wartime. And they said, you were feeding us. Next day they went out and they brought a box of sultanas in. And so my dad was getting a bit worried by this time. He said, are you doing right? I said, well, we've got to live off something. And the next day they went in and they brought something else in. I can't remember what it was, because I was only small then, and blankets and everything. Anyway, the thaw came and they eventually disappeared. Next caller we had was the police. Had we had 3 people staying with us? And we said, well, yes, we had. They said, well, they hadn't a lorry at all. They were raiding all the lorries of Shap. So all these blankets were left, and those blankets were shared out between the police and us, and I think I still have one of those blankets today to remember them by.